Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We're your hosts, Adriana M.A. and
Jackie Sanders. We are two art professionals sharing forward the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
We talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you'll be notified when we drop a new episode every Tuesday. On today's episode, we are so excited to have artist Adam Cohen with us. So welcome to the podcast, Adam.
Hello. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, Adam, we're looking forward to discussing your creative journey, a bit about your art process and some business advice, as well as recording a bonus segment on income streams for our podcast supporters on levelupartist.com, but we'll do that towards the end of the episode. So thank you so much.
Sounds great.
And before we get started, let's share a little bit more about you and your background for our listeners who might not be familiar with our work. So Adam Cohen is a Raleigh-based visual artist who works primarily in the human figure. He paints human interiors, turning people inside out, revealing their spirit, both his and, hopefully when you look at them, yours too. He received an MFA from the Savannah College of Art and Design, and his work is held in private collections throughout the country. He is currently a studio artist at Art Space in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we are so excited to have him on the podcast today. But of course, Adam, this is the formal introduction to our listeners, but how would you describe your work to people who haven't seen your artwork before?
Yes, let's get this as informal as we can, as quickly as we can. I don't do formal very well. So my work is expressively figurative, paintings and drawings. As you mentioned there, I kind of think of like I paint people from the inside out. And so there's a lot of distortion with form and color that sort of expresses what's underneath the surface is kind of what's happening there, what the goal is consciously and unconsciously. But it's all pretty much working with the figure. I do some, still life, some landscape, but 95% of what I do is with the figure.
Yeah. And would you say it would be accurate to add to that, again, considering that, a lot of the people that listen to our podcast may be in the car, right? Of course, we'll have links for those that want to check out, your website and everything, but would you say it's also, or at least this is my impression of it, it's figurative, but also there's a sense of freedom and I don't know, it feels like bold and almost some loose, colorful strokes in there. And there's almost like this mix between like abstract and somewhat intuitive to something recognizable. So you're like, that's a person or that's a horse, for example,
Right.
but the head is bigger, but it's colorful. And then there's these small people next to it. And it's like, distorting it, but colorful and almost like, I don't know, almost like a tongue in cheek.
Yeah, it is very much. I mean, I incorporate a lot of improvisational mark making, a lot of abstract marks, and it does kind of straddle those two worlds. And in the same way that it straddles kind of the unconscious and the conscious, it straddles abstract and figurative. And I do like that push and pull of that. So I like to play with how much you can stretch it and push it until it becomes a little hard to decipher. So your eye kind of tries to make sense of what you're looking at, and you have these more clear figurative little, as I call them, handles that sort of, okay, well, I know what that is. And then that helps give me a clue as to what this form over here is. And so by going in and out of more literal imagery, it's what I like to do when I look at images, and what I try to do with my viewers is to kind of get you engaged that way. It's almost like a puzzle you're trying to work out with your eyes, so that's part of how I like to kind of engage the audience.
Yeah, and I like to there's illustration, there's even some, would you say printmaking as well, which I think is how we met you before you came over to Art Space.
Oh, right.
You did something with your wife where you guys were handing out these free prints, but they were not like printer prints. They were like printmaking prints, to make the quick distinction. And they had like this illustrated monster on it type. Almost, it's not quite a caricature. I think that's the wrong term, but it's most definitely like more of an illustration. And it still had some abstract elements, but also some more recognizable ones. And I think that's how I think that's how we met. You were,
I think that is where we met.
Yeah.
Right before I came to Art Space. Those were silk screens that I had done some series with Skillet Gilmore. He did
Nice.
the silk screening. He's so good at that. And my background is cartooning and illustration. That's kind of what I grew up doing. When I was a teenager, I was doing a lot of cartooning. In high school, I did a lot of political cartoons, some for the Charlotte Observer and
Nice.
Chapel Hill newspaper. And when I was in college, the Daily Tar Heel, and I was kind of pursuing that route for a long time. So the figure was central in that, distortions and exaggerations and caricature was central to that whole thing, and have carried that into painting. But whereas in the cartoon world, those things are done more in an effort to lampoon or satirize or comment or criticize. In my art now, the distortions have more to do with, like I said before, revealing kind of the emotions and character underneath, and stories, people's lives and stuff. So those prints, I did give away a couple of rounds of prints here at Art Space that was related to a nonprofit project that we were working on, which we can touch on later. Um, but those prints definitely got even more illustrative feeling. And in fact, my MFA that I got at SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design, was in illustration. So I was much more in that world at the time, but still learning kind of the fundamentals of drawing and, visual art just in that kind of world. And I kind of slowly made my way over to the fine art world. So,
Which he put fine art in air quotes for those who are not watching on YouTube.
Mighty fine art. Yeah.
The mighty fine art. But yeah, I think that is definitely one thing that I admire so much about your work, is that you really do kind of bridge the gap between multiple mediums, but also like multiple categories that many artists may feel pressured to have to fit into. Like, oh, I am only a cartoon artist. I am only an illustrator. I'm only a painter. But especially after getting to know you as neighbors together at Art Space and working with you through nonprofits, we worked on the Art of Recovery event this past fall together, really learning about all your talents. I mean, even writing, stand-up comedy, the creative outlets seem to be like endless for you. It's just a matter of finding which outlet is the right one for your idea, for a project. And I'm curious, you touched on a little bit about kind of like the beginning of your creative journey, starting even down into high school, working at local papers, doing cartoons for them. But when do you feel like, if there's potentially a moment that you felt like you could really call yourself maybe quote unquote professional artist? What was that moment for you?
That was in high school when I was a senior. There was a cartoonist in Charlotte named Doug Marlette, who was the political cartoonist for the Charlotte Observer. And I had interviewed him in 6th grade for a school project because my parents were big fans of his. He was kind of a local celebrity. He went on to win the Pulitzer Prize later. He also did the comic strip Kudzu. He was a playwright. He was another kind of multi-hyphenated artist. But we had books of his at home. And so I went and interviewed him in 6th grade. So kind of knew him. And then when I was a senior, I was doing political cartoons, and I just called him up and asked if I could show him some of them. And he loved them, and he showed them to the editors there, and they started running them on the op-ed page. And also there was a local section of the paper where I sort of ran twice a week my whole senior year. So that was a great time. I was getting to comment on local things. I would do my cartoon at home, and I would bring it down to the newsroom back when there still were newsrooms and newspapers still existed, and paper existed, and printing existed. And I'd hand off my cartoon, talk to my editor there in the local section, go over to Doug's office, watch him draw his cartoon for the next day, and then see both of them in the paper the next day. And I was getting some money for those cartoons, like $75 a pop, which, in high school in the mid 80s, that was good money. I was able to quit my job at Bush Stationers as a stock boy. So that was cool.
And especially that like hands-on experience within the creative process too, like seeing, especially thinking, okay, I feel like a lot of the time in situations where you're fortunate enough to where like your creative outlet is nurtured and celebrated from teachers or family, but then it's a totally different thing as a young creative to see, okay, from an application standpoint, what are the potential avenues that I have? And so seeing that in action firsthand, okay, you got to learn quick turnaround time if you're going to want to be a cartoonist professionally. How does this work? How does the newsroom feel? Rather than, and getting that exposure so early is incredible.
It was great to make deadlines. When I was in college and I did a few cartoons for the Chapel Hill newspaper, I was kind of late one night biking my cartoon up there, and the publisher editor was about to pull out of the parking lot in his car, and he rolled down the window and cussed me out. That was an early lesson in punctuality and making deadlines. Um, but yeah, it was a great experience, and I kind of continued doing it through college. So I was doing it professionally starting in high school. I mean, not enough to live on, but getting a check. So and then my creative career took so many twists and turns, which we can get to later. But it
Mhm.
all kind of grew out of that initial stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing, and it's good to know that, like Jackie said, you had the chance to get exposed to that as a career path early on. Because with so
Hmm.
many creatives, it's always like, even if their family is encouraging, it might be, at least it was in my case, it was more of a, why don't you do graphic design or
Yeah.
architecture or things that
Yeah.
led, like web building, that pay, versus just purely the art stuff. You can do that as a hobby. So it's good that you got to see, no, you can actually get paid for your art early on. Of course, with the challenge of, how do you pay the bills with it? Which
Yeah.
then, fast forward leads into today. Like, were you able to make the switch at some point and just do it full time, or do you still have like another side job part time, or bring us
I
to
had
today?
I had to, well, so the cartooning, I definitely have some right brain, left brain things going on. I've always been a writer, always been a visual artist, was probably a writer more primarily. I kind of had to make myself learn more how to be a visual artist. But there's writing and drawing in cartoons. And um, when I got out of art school, I was taking illustrations around to ad agencies, and I had some of my political cartoons in there. And one creative director recognized that that's the same kind of muscles you need to make ads, to create advertisements, words and pictures, the
Mhm.
combination of those two things to make a point, to like compel your audience to feel something or do something. And so he said, well, I know you're not, I was trying to be a kind of a freelance illustrator at the time. And he's like, I know you're not making any money as an illustrator. Have you ever thought about getting into advertising? And I said, well, I have thought about it. So he kind of sent me home with some books and had me, we're sort of self-taught. I whipped up a bunch of ads, sketched some concepts out, brought them back into him. He destroyed all of them. They were terrible. He said, go try again. I went and tried again. And he liked them. And he brought me on as like a freelance art director because I could draw.
Nice.
And, but after a year being an art director, which involved more graphic design, typography, which was not really my training, I was sort of learning it, but even though I could draw, I didn't love the graphic design, doing it myself. I switched over to copywriting, and that quickly in the ad world became my thing. I could think visually, I could draw concepts if need be, I could draw storyboards if we were doing a television script or something, but I was primarily a copywriter. In the ad world, you work as a team. There's these two-person teams. It's a word person and a visual person work together. So it's usually a copywriter and an art director. So I
Okay.
became the copywriter in the team, but often I
Perfect.
could draw and the art director couldn't draw, but they were just great at design. Um, so that became kind of my track in advertising, and that's what I did for 30 years. So that's how I was paying the rent. That's how I bought a house. That's how I did all those things, raised a family, all those, in the ad world. It was still creative. It wasn't necessarily the creative thing I most wanted to be doing, but it was definitely better for me than working at a bank or something. And I was always pursuing the real passionate creative stuff on the side. And that was like from political cartoons to a comic strip that got picked up by a syndicate but didn't quite take off. Um, there was online blog stuff. I did filmmaking for a while,
Nice.
veered off into that, made some short films, entered into festivals, things like that. Um, and then there was, after, as you mentioned, there were 7 years of stand-up comedy, and that was very writing focused. And then some
Yeah.
performing brought that part into it. Um,
So you've always been balancing those two things, the
yeah,
left brain, the right brain, but always intertwining that creativity in everything that you did. I feel like, especially as someone who currently works in digital marketing as well, like knowing
yeah,
that understanding of the relationship between visuals and ad copy, there is
right,
so much power in that relationship. But being able to write the ad copy that's not only strategically powerful, but also having a visual in mind with it is a huge strength. And that's kind of using some of your visual artist skills
Right.
within that professional field. But I am curious too, then, with your journey to art space, what was your relationship to or with art space before you moved in there? Like, how
Hmm.
did you hear about it? Were you a
Hmm.
frequent visitor?
Hmm.
Because of course we did not meet until Adriana and I both had studios there. We moved in
Right.
2020.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious your relationship with that in Raleigh.
Well, I worked in the ad world full time up until 2014, and then I decided I was going to really split my time in half between freelance advertising and creative pursuits. And at that time, it was comedy, animation, but then the visual art started coming back in, and so I started getting heavier and heavier into that. I mean, I've done it all through the years, but that's when I started going full bore into the visual art, the fine art stuff, gallery type stuff. And I kind of knew some of the art space folks from different connections over the years. Obviously, I knew about art space going back to the early 90s when I first lived in Raleigh before I moved out to San Francisco for a while. Um, I had worked with art space on their marketing committee some before I had a studio here. So I knew folks that way. Um, and then just the timing was right when I was ready to get a studio out of my house, and COVID was going on, and there were some openings, and it worked out well. So
That
that's
Nice.
how
perfect
I ended
timing.
up here. Yeah,
Nice.
yeah,
Well, and especially in the past, art space was notorious. It was really hard to get in because
yeah.
not a lot of people were leaving. So that was actually fortuitous for
It
us to
was the right time to
be
go
able
for it
to get
because
in.
they rolled over a lot of folks right around that time. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it actually worked out. But I'm
Hmm.
interested in hearing a little bit more. So some of these other creative projects and, your career and everything else, I imagine a lot of it had to do, like, yes, you had creative input, but also it was client facing. Like, oh,
Right.
we need an ad for XYZ produce company or I don't know,
Yep.
grocery store, whatever it is. So obviously with that, yes, you can put your own flavor on it to a certain extent within the client's parameters. So I'm glad to
Hmm.
hear that you were always and, have always like continued to prioritize doing your own personal work.
Right.
But a question that I would have with it is like how would you describe your creative practice as being something that's not just about a client, but, like, when it comes to your own work, something
Hmm.
bigger than yourself? Like, how would
Oh
you
yeah. Hmm.
kind of like that idea? Because 'cause I'm like, it's easier when it comes to working with a c or not easy, but when it comes to a client, actually, I feel like it's a little bit more straightforward because they're like, "We want these colors. This is the
Yeah.
kind of stuff we like. This is what our brand is about," and you, in a way, almost get to react to that and then interact with it and then go from there and then hope that what you create, they like and have tough armadillo skin for when they go, I hate that concept. Do it.
Right.
But how about like when it comes over to your either quote unquote fine artwork or, going a little bit farther than that and trying to connect with people. Like you said, like there's stories and things like that
Yeah.
reflected in it.
Well, I don't think I could have made it in the ad world if I didn't have my own creative stuff on the side. And I always tell young creatives that are in that world to always have something you're doing on your own that you have complete control over, because you're a creative for hire in the advertising or whatever professional creative world. And they can ultimately, say yay or nay. I mean, one of the main the art to working in that world is to walk your client through the strategy in such a way that steers them and funnels them towards the best possible
Mhm.
solution. If you lay the groundwork well enough, a lot of the times you can sell them the best thing that you like. But there's always going to be that certain percentage of times where it just doesn't work, and you'll get an ulcer if you don't have some
You
other
want to get
outlet.
paid. You may have to fix it a few
Yeah,
times.
yeah, you're going to have to do that, and so it's just great to go home and do whatever you want in your art. And then when it comes to my art, that's a much more intrinsic. It's coming from inside me. I mean, but you could approach your art career. You could end up in a very similar place as I was in the ad world if you really are trying to. If your focus is really on the audience and pleasing certain audiences with your art, which is fine if that's what you're comfortable doing, it's not that different from the ad world, because you're making stuff, you're gauging the reaction, you're adjusting based on whether it's accepted or not, and that's fine. But when and I can do that in the ad world, but I find I can't do it as much in the art world, I guess, because I just had that division in my mind. And I guess the personal creative pursuits for me were always kind of precious that way, and kind of holy. It was like, it's for me, even though I wanted to end up in people's lives. So I'm much more tuned into just what my eyes are reacting to, what my body is reacting to, the stuff that no matter how much I look at it later, it resonates with me. It feels right. And just accepting where the chips fall when it comes to that. Because, I was surprised to find out early on in this sort of fine art world. I love figurative art. I love having it. I love making it. Certain percentage of people like that too, but my stuff, it's all figurative, and a lot of it has this emotion to it. And I found there was a surprising number of people who don't necessarily want that in their homes. I mean, they like it fine, but they don't want to live with this person on their wall that has this expression on their face, even if it just feels like there's a person in your home, and there's an emotion to it that not everyone is comfortable with. So there's not a lot of, I mean, it's kind of hard to find a gallery who will carry my kind of figurative art. Um, and I had to kind of, well, I didn't really have to make a decision. I saw the types of things that I would have a better chance of selling in this type of market. And I sort of dabbled a little in those areas, but I just couldn't do it. It's not my best work. It's just not
Mm.
what wants to come out of me. And I just had to accept, like, this is the work that's coming out of me. It has an audience. I sell a good percentage of it. I just have to find my people out there. But it's much less. Whereas in the ad world, it's very much catering to the audience and
Mhm.
just looking to them for guidance. This is me following my inner voice, my inner sort of aesthetic, and then finding the audience that also resonates with that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
don't you love it when
absolutely.
that audience comes into your studio and it's almost like they can read what's
Yeah,
inside that painting and they connect with it at a completely different level because
right.
we all know artists. I'm like Thomas Kincaid, like, I'm just joking, of course, right? But we all know artists that, like, will go full commercial, and that's fine too. Like, everybody's
Mhm,
gotta pay their bills, but I feel lucky that early-ish on, like, after I had switched careers, one of my mentors who's based out of Asheville actually was like, if what you make is authentic to you, so this to me resonates because I'm like, this is exactly
mhm,
what I had to accept too. He's like, if it's authentic to you and you pursue it and you're like, there's a purity behind it, right? It's not just for money. Now, we still got to sell it and make money, don't get me wrong. But the
yeah,
creation of it itself, the concepts of it itself are pure, then you will find the actual people that connect with it because it's
mhm,
authentic and your story comes through and it's almost like a language and they happen to be able to read that language too. And then there's that
yeah,
connection. And he was like, just figure out what you want to be known for. And if what you want to be known for is for certain styles, certain colors, people will come. Like they will connect with it if it
yeah,
is, but don't try to fit into a box to cater to them. At least not with quote unquote fine art or capital A art. Commercial art, that's a different story. There you gotta do
yeah.
what you gotta do to
It's
pay the bills, but
No, it's true, and I actually didn't show my work for a very, very long time because I just kind of follow that muse where it goes, and it ends. The styles can be a little all over the place. Although I think when you look at all my work in one batch, you say this all came from one person, but it does vary more than I wanted it to when I was younger, and more than I see in other artists. And I kept thinking, I've got to hone it down. I've got to get it down to a more
niche
consistent.
down, niche
Mhm.
Yeah,
down.
and I finally just said, "Screw it." I'm just, I can either make art or not make art. I'm getting old here. I can't wait much longer. So, um, and what I found is that no matter how far I stray in any direction, there's somebody out there who it resonates with.
Mhm.
You know, we have our followings on social media, and I have this e-blast and stuff, and people that have known me my whole life, people that have only known me for a couple of months. But it's fascinating how I'll try something new, and I'll be a little nervous about it because it's such a left turn. And then I'll post it, and then somebody who's never spoken up or hit a like or done anything will suddenly be like, "I have to own that. How much is it?" And so the
Yeah.
lesson there is, like, if it really resonates inside me, and I authentically, truly feel something about it, there's going to be somebody out there somewhere who will also get that wavelength.
Mhm.
And to just have that faith has been important. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even think that ties back into what you were saying earlier when thinking about galleries or gallery representation and a struggle that you've had there with um, people may not necessarily want that figure in their home because it's almost the highest form of compliment of it feels like there's a presence in the room when you're in the room with that
There's an
painting.
intensity. Yeah,
Yeah, which is kind of a backhanded compliment
that's
because
true.
it's almost
Yeah,
like so successful, but then you're like, but then they might not want it all the time. It's like it's an
right,
empowering experience.
right.
But one that may be draining if it's all the time. And so especially knowing your background, balancing like print ad and your own creative practice, honestly, the way that your creative practice has developed makes a lot of sense to me in that it is that balance of okay the business minded strategic mind of okay
Hmm.
I need things to fill these buckets or to pursue galleries or to be commercial, but then since you lived so long almost compartmentalizing your two practices like the
Yeah,
strategic business can cut
yeah,
it off after a work day mentally practice and then this love that you've had for making these work not putting the pressure of sales on it and it's truly your outlet. So then when you try to merge the two, it can
yeah,
feel very jarring.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, so I love that idea of knowing that your true audience is out there. Kind of taking that business owner strategic hat off for a second. And that's almost what propels the work forward and makes your audience come to you, which feels counterintuitive. By not worrying about your audience, you attract your audience
that's
in a
right. It's
way.
more about attraction. It's more about attraction, and there is some strategy to that because the strategy there is just get it as far and wide as you can. The more people you expose it to, the more of those short tail niche audience members you're going to find. Um, and that's just a different mindset than I've done the apply to jury shows, whatever, apply to the galleries, do that, get your list, be applying to something every week. And, I've done a lot of that. But it's shifting more to an attraction model to where
Mm,
it's more like a numbers game where the more people I expose it to, the better chance it has of connecting with the people it's supposed to be connecting with.
mhm.
So,
Absolutely. And so when thinking about that attraction model, maybe there isn't a completely type A thought out strategy for it.
mhm,
But aside from just the vague term like your target audience, what things
mhm.
are you thinking about when who you are trying to target? Is it specific emotions? Is it specific experiences, scale of for that person that you envision being a collector or connector with your piece? What things
Well,
do you think about?
I'm thinking about that kind of stuff less and less, and just kind of going with my gut of what I want to see, what I want to make. Early on, I was making bigger canvases, and I still do. Because I was thinking early on, I want to go into these types of galleries. I see what size canvases they're selling, so that's the size I'm going to work. Um, and didn't connect with any galleries. I've sold a lot of those paintings, um, and so I'm not pursuing galleries the way I was. So that's opening me up to do a range of things at different price points and different sizes, and it can, again, it's more like the wider the range of things I do, the more people are going to find a connection with it. Um, the same way about the more people I show, the more chance I find someone who's going to connect with it. So I think more in terms of like series, like, um, well, I will say it's sort of a case by case thing. Like I have a show in South Carolina in this kind of clubhouse on this island off Charleston. And I've seen the room and I see kind of what size canvases are needed there. I already have enough big ones for the big walls. So for the next couple of months, I'm going to be doing, some 18 by 24 range pieces, just because I know that's where they're going to be hanging.
Yeah.
Um, there was a show that's up right now at Acme Food and Beverage in Carborough, and I did a series. I needed a way to, okay, I need 7 paintings for this. How can I approach this? So I came up with a theme, which is covers. I take paintings from history and reinterpret them the way a jazz group might reinterpret an old standard. And I knew the sizes of the walls that were needed to be filled there, and that's what dictated the size, and that gave me a theme to get through. So I needed to pick out 7 paintings that I would reinterpret. So it's kind of a case by case in that way. I There was an art fair we had here a few weeks ago. And I was like, oh, I want some lower price point things, some framed works on paper. So I made a dozen of those, for that. Um, and so that seems to be working for me at the moment.
Yeah, I like that. Question for you. So, curious about the process, being the nerdy one, possibly. Sorry, but being the nerd, I have to ask. Are you using any kind of digital, like tablets or anything like that, in order to
Mm,
plan out these kind of series? Because I know, at least speaking from personal experience, yes, I can switch and have a 4-inch painting next to a 4-foot one and work on them
mhm,
at the same
mhm,
time. Yes, of
mhm,
course, I need different size brushes, but like I can toggle between the two as long as I have a plan. Like, if I'm trying to do it from, pull the ideas from the ether, forget about it, they're too different. But if, for example, I have either on paper or digitally kinda sketched out, like, done a painting study of what I think they're gonna become, at least the basics of it, then I can
mhm,
toggle between the 2. So, bringing it back to, process for just a second and, like, making the work, since you are switching, different techniques, different sizes, different substrates, how do you plan that out? Do you use, like, tablets, anything digital, anything like that? Any apps?
Um, I do as little planning and preliminary work as possible. I try to make my work as improvisational as possible. That series that I did with the covers required more sort of upfront work than well, that was an unusual amount of prep work. But even then, once I had the painting chosen, all I had was that painting, and I knew the size canvas I was working on and the orientation of the canvas because I knew what wall it had to go on. And beyond that, I just start diving in and I start making a mess. Um, and that's my approach has become so much more about improvisation and happy accidents and just chance. I'm going down one route. I just start. You do some of this the way you work in layers. I'll work on a whole layer of improvising marks and shapes, and then I'll just turn the thing upside down and start in on my figures. And then if I don't like the way it's going, I'll either go right on top of it or I'll just turn the thing over again, and you'll start to see remnants of previous rounds underneath it. And I love ending up with something that has this history to it. You can kind of sense the history. You can't trace it exactly, but you can feel the history of this painting. You can kind of see the layers there. It's nothing I could have planned, and it's nothing. I end up with a piece that I could have never planned and I could never replicate ever. So the idea of like working it out on the tablet and then doing it on the thing, I did work that way for years with cartoons and illustrations and some of my art early on. But over the years, I've let that go more and more and more to where um, I want to be surprised and I want something to emerge that I did not plan. And that's where the idea of collaborating with something bigger than myself comes in. That over the years, the feeling is I've had less of a tight grip on the outcome of what my pieces are. I don't want to know where they're going to end up before I start. Um, they worked for a while, but then it became almost, I would lose the energy behind it if I knew where I was going. I wanted to live in this space of discovering where I was going as I went, 100%. Um, and as I let go of my control of that outcome and I let control of the grip, and these accidents come in and these sort of weird zigging and zagging happens that I didn't plan. It's more like the art is being made through me uh, instead of by me, but it's both. So that's why I call it a collaboration. Like I do think that our work is sort of there. We're just kind of channels for our work. I mean, it's not that we have no role in it at all, but I'm trying to just dial down my role more and more and more. I love when I make something that I don't know how I made it, and it doesn't even look like me. Like doesn't look like something I've made before. Like I'm really trying to erase my fingerprints from it in a lot of ways. Now, the irony is, you still look at my work and it's all clearly coming from one guy. That's unavoidable. But I just find it's got a richer depth to it the less I try to control it. I feel like other things are coming into it that are not necessarily me, but they're coming through me. So it all has that sort of same feel. It all came from the same person. So.
Yeah, I love that.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's kind of funny how that happens, especially with as artists. A lot of the time we will do what we consider a drastic turn left, or we're
Yeah.
drastically shifting our work. And then you have a friend or a collector or someone come in and they say, this is very obviously done by you. And you're like,
Yeah.
what do you mean? This is totally different. It's not
Right.
consistent. And they're like,
Every artist has that. It's
this
so
is
funny. Yeah.
obviously your work.
Yeah.
And I think, especially to your point from tying it back to earlier of like, if you're making just work based on your authentic voice,
Yeah.
then you're the commonality with it. Like, of course, what you naturally gravitate towards from an art making standpoint, from a content standpoint, from just like the visual balance or composition, that will all is filtered through you and your preferences in your mind, even when you try to completely disconnect, which I think is kind of that magic behind it when you are making work for your own creative outlet, for your own emotional experience. And I love that idea of making artwork almost project based, as you were saying, really the only parameters and planning that you put on it at most would be if it's for a site specific
Hmm.
series, or you know, okay, I have to fill X space, then okay, I need 12 canvases at this size. Other than that, that's really the only assignment, so to speak, that you give yourself. And then whatever
Yeah.
happy accidents come through that, which I feel like your ability to be so agile in your creative process and not limit yourself by a specific style or a specific medium lends itself to be a big strength, because I'm sure your brain has been
Yeah.
trained to work by balancing so many creative outlets. It's trained to not have to be limited, quote unquote,
Yeah.
by a set visual style. It's really only the scale parameter, which is more of a logistics thing figured out, or a requirement. If you committed 3 pieces to an exhibition, you can't necessarily show up with 2 and say, well, I wasn't really creatively called to make 3.
Right.
Like,
There are
but you
certain
committed to
ground
3.
rules. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And really, this approach I found, and it might just be an age thing. It's just I get freer and freer and freer with it because the more improvisational it is, I'm not a prisoner of it. Like I'm not thinking about it. I don't have to think about it when I'm not doing it, and I don't have to think about it even that much while I'm doing it. Like I'm trying to just be in the moment, and I find the less involved I am that way, the better. Or at least I like the work better. I just think it's more surprising and rich and has more depth to it. That the kind of less I have to do with it in a way. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I love that. There's a one of the most important teachers I've had in my career, named Heather Gurney. She teaches intuitive painting, and I found it interesting. And I think this ties in perfectly to what you're saying, improvisational or intuitive. Honestly, I think they're interchangeable in this
that's
case.
right. Same
It's
thing.
almost the sense of like once you have mastery over a certain part of the process, it does become intuitive because you don't have to overthink it. Like,
Right.
for example, like, do you use harmonizing colors? Do you prefer working in squares or in landscape mode? You prefer
Right.
acrylics over oils? Like, whatever those things are, it's almost like you are giving yourself that freedom because you've already gone down all those rabbit holes and have been observant and mindful of what you do and don't like. And it's almost like that's why now you can go free range, so to speak, and it
Yeah.
still looks like you and it's still cohesive. It's because, like, even though you're not giving yourself firm parameters for what you're doing, all in a way you have. Technically, you have, maybe subconsciously of like, "I never use that color, I don't like that tool." Like, you've already done those things, you've already had a chance to explore and separate separate the seed from the rest of it
Well,
and
you
be
just
like,
found you found your
like
voice. I mean, you've
yeah,
worked through it enough. You have enough reps under you that you know
then you
what.
can be
I
intuitive,
think that's
yeah.
what the process of becoming an artist is. I think early on, I always the things we're attracted to are the things that want to come out of us. I mean, our influences. I think we're seeing clues about the art that wants to come out of us when we get inspired by a piece of art. It's like another clue as to what my style is. And then there's a great Elvis Costello quote, and we copy those things that we love. And the way that we get it wrong is our style. Actually, we didn't get it wrong. It's just there was a part of it that we needed to incorporate into our style, and the way it combines with other parts of our style makes it look different from the thing we copied, and it adds to that until we've assembled these influences to the point where we've assembled our voice. We found out the work that has been trying to come out of us. I find since I was a child. I mean, I feel like the work that's come out of me now was there when I was a child. Um, it's similar in a lot of ways to a lot of picture book things, children's book styles, illustration styles when I was a kid that I loved, that I was responding to back then. And it just takes that amount of time and work and reps to finally your fully formed style is coming out of you. And then, like you said, it's just like talking or breathing. Now I'm not thinking about it so much. I'm just kind of acting. And that's kind of what we want to get to. I mean, it's taken a long
It
time,
takes a
but
while.
yeah,
It
yeah,
definitely yeah, I know, it's like because we are public facing, we get artists of all levels, and one of the questions like, "I wanna have my style, like, how what can I do?" And it's like, "Practice, practice, practice,
you just
practice."
got to keep doing it. In fact, I just posted that on Facebook. It was a Miles Davis quote. He's like, "Man, sometimes it takes a really long time to find." Was it? It was. He said, "Man, sometimes it takes you a long time to sound like yourself."
Yep.
Miles Davis said that. And
Oh, I love that.
there's another great jazz quote in the movie Around Midnight. Dexter Gordon plays this sax player, and he's a real sax player who plays a fictional one, and he's talking to this young writer, I think, in Paris, and he said, people think style is something you can just go pick up off the tree, just choose it, and it's
Mhm.
the tree is growing inside of you. It's not something you can go out and grab. You have to find that tree that's growing inside of you, which is another way of saying what we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. It's like a combination of like your personality, your experiences, and also your taste. And like
Yeah.
that's I mean, there's so many inputs into that. It's just figuring out, well, how to squeeze it out, right?
And we're
Onto
all
the
there's no
canvas.
no two people are the same,
Yeah,
and no two true style is this. I mean, if your style does look exactly like someone else's, you probably haven't found your style yet. I just don't believe that any two artists have the same natural style.
agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. Question for you. So obviously, like you've explored a lot of different medias, different, well, in a way, styles, right? Like what would your style
Yeah.
look like in black and white cartoon only? What would your
Hmm.
style look like in painting? And of course, over time, as you do these different ones, they start again cohesifying with each other because it's still the wrist of the same artist. But throughout your career, is there something that you wish you had done but you haven't yet? Whether it's
Hmm.
business or art making itself that you're like, "Oh, man, this is still on the bucket list,"
Hmm.
or
Um,
past.
yeah, I mean, there's not any. I would like to do some real giant paintings at some point. I don't know if that necessarily means a mural or just a huge canvas. I just don't, you kind of have
What
to
do
have
you
a,
consider huge?
I don't know, something like the biggest I've looked now is only like 4 feet wide by 3 feet tall. So, like, what if it was, 6, 8 feet wide, 12 feet wide, even more? I was just at the Louvre in October for the first time, and they were all so massive. And I was like, God, I'd love to do one like this someday.
Yeah.
It's just
It's
like
so
you've got
funny,
to have a
like
reason to do that. You can't just kind of keep that laying around for 10 years, this 10-foot painting. I don't know where you keep that.
yeah, of course, like
Unchecked canvas.
That's
logistics
right.
are the
That's right.
first thing I think of where it's like, okay, storage of it. And yeah, like you probably unstretch it, then roll
Yeah.
it up, the
Yeah. Yeah.
logistics of that, and then finding potentially a gallery or museum or a private collector that has a wall that size that has
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of logistics
So
of it, but it is fun
that
how our sense of scale too shifts throughout our creative process. Like there are
totally.
moments where an 18 by 24 maybe feels huge if you're used to drawing on a 8.5 by
Absolutely.
11 sheet of paper. Then the second you do a 3 foot painting and you're like, oh my goodness, this is
Yeah.
insanely big. Then you move into a downtown studio where you have 30-foot long walls and you're like, oh, this 3 foot painting suddenly feels very small.
Yeah.
You just keep
Yeah.
getting bigger and bigger and then contract to
Totally.
smaller.
I know. I love that. I'll find an old painting where at the time I thought it was like big enough to go in the Louvre, and now it's like a mid-sized painting for me.
Yeah.
But I'd also like to do some more maybe dimensional type things or cutout type. I was really attracted to Red Grooms and Alex Katz early on, and they did these kind of installation figures. I've just I'd love to fill the studio up with like a bunch of people standing around, almost like a cocktail party or something. All these distorted figures. I just that maybe that's not the concept, but just probably looking for an excuse to make some of those kind of stand up cutout type figures at
Yeah,
some
I love
point.
that. Like bridge the gap between your paintings and sculpture, more like an immersive experience type of
Yeah.
site
Yes,
specific installation.
that's
Yeah.
right. Something like that at some point when the opportunity presents itself. Yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe you could find a grant or maybe an open call where you can have,
Mhm.
like, a little bit of freedom, and if it comes with a stipend,
Right.
then that makes it, even better to be able to say, like, I need some funds to make this thing happen. I have a
Yeah.
vision."
Yeah,
just,
I like
hand
that.
over the check, please."
That's good. That's
But
good.
that actually leads me to a question. I want to bounce back to something you mentioned a little bit earlier regarding opportunities. You had mentioned like making lists of what to apply to and what galleries to go after. Perhaps that's how it was done in the past. Fast forward to today. How do you seek out opportunities and how do you keep them organized?
Hmm. Well, like I said, there's less chasing things down now and more attracting things. So, um, I'm trying to think if there's a pattern to how I'm seeking out opportunities. Things are just happening more organically now. Like, I just did that cover for Walter magazine, and Sir Walter Raleigh's on the cover. And
Which is
eh,
very exciting.
thank you,
Congratulations.
thank you.
Congratulations.
Um, yeah, that was great. It was really, I couldn't have gotten that without being at Art Space. That's where they found me here. So I did three different Walters for the cover and three different styles, and they picked one. But now I have these three Walters. I own the rights to it. So someone was like, "Oh, you ought to take that over to Deco," because they do all these Raleigh related merchandise. So I showed it to them. They flipped. We're going to be talking soon about what we can do with it. I got some prints made. People were wanting to buy that painting, but I've been holding on to it. And then somebody's like, "Well, you should have prints." And I was like, "Why didn't I think of that?" And so I ordered prints, and now I'm selling all these prints. I wasn't even planning. So I don't
Great.
know if I'm leaving money on the table with this mentality, but it's organic. It's how it's happening. So I might not be as intentional as you were hoping in that
Well,
answer.
no, I think that is a great way of, as we've talked about, like your goal is to just be as authentic and
Right.
present in your creative process as possible. And by dedicating yourself to that and doing figurative work, then as you mentioned, an individual from Walter Magazine came through Art Space and they were
Right.
looking for someone to do a Sir Walter portrait for
Yep.
the cover. Being one of the few artists at Art Space that may do figurative work, then the opportunity presented itself. They connected with your style. You didn't already have those paintings made. So it
Right.
wasn't like you made it looking for that opportunity, but they connected with your
Yeah.
intentional style. And then from there, that ripple effect made opportunities happen. So
Yeah.
I almost am curious.
Coming to Art Space was one of those main things of like, it's numbers now. Hundreds of people are going to see my work that were not seeing it in my condominium. So,
Yeah.
and then these opportunities came. So I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Oh no, you're fine. I think it's just one of those, yeah, by having a community facing studio, as you mentioned, it kind of puts your creative process at the forefront of your, if you think of it as like a marketing strategy, so to speak, because you're welcoming people into your creative space, your creative process. Take a look around. We really have no transparent or like full transparency. I mean,
Right. Right.
especially with our studios being on the second floor, we don't even have ceilings. So you're like, I don't even
Yes.
think I can work on a secret project because I literally don't have a ceiling. People just
Yeah.
look at it whenever they want.
That's right.
And I think that's a fun part of being in a community space like that, where you're just
Yeah.
kind of waiting for things to come to you, but more so just making sure that you're prepared and available when the right conversation happens. But I also think giving yourself a little bit more credit, you are super involved in the community.
Yeah.
As I mentioned in the beginning, we worked together on the Art of Recovery event through Healing Transitions this past fall.
Yeah.
Of course, your lifetime of network within Raleigh. And
Yeah.
as you mentioned, a nonprofit that you're working on launching. So
Yeah.
could you tell us a bit more about that
Yeah.
and maybe some other projects you have going on?
Yeah, that's the big one, and that's a great example of how things move forward for me. Over COVID, I came up with this concept. It went through a lot of iterations. My wife and I are working on it together, and it's not really officially live yet, but it's a, it's a it's an organization that basically gets art into places where art hasn't normally gone, places like drug rehab facilities, like Healing Transitions, or shelters, or free and charitable medical clinics, where the healing power of art can work its magic in these places the same way it does in nice hospitals like Rex and Wake Med, who are putting art up in their cardiac wards because it's proven that art helps with healing. So the idea is, well, let's put that everywhere, but let's give it away for free. But what we'll do is we'll raise money and we will buy the art off of artists, and then give it to these organizations. So like we'll have a gallery. The organizations will pick out the art And when it gets chosen, we pay the artist the same way any other gallery would.
Mhm.
So it's kind of a two-headed mission where we're supporting emerging artists and we're getting art into these spaces. Um, and we've started to hang some of the work there so we can shoot it and have content for our website. And we put some in Healing Transitions a couple of weeks ago in their family room. And there's like 4 different artists had work in there. One of them was me. And it transformed this room, and the people, the appreciation of the art was like off the charts. You've never seen art more appreciated, both because it beautified the environment, but just that it was nice stuff. In a lot of these places are, they get a lot of hand me down. They're working on such tight budgets. Um, some of them just feel like prisons, and suddenly you have this beautiful, accomplished art everywhere. And um, so that's something I'm working on. But then personally, the peace of mind that got put there had that kind of emotion that we were talking about that can be off-putting to some people, but in this environment it really resonated with, really resonated with folks. And because it's an emotionally raw environment, and it has a cathartic effect where you see something on the wall that aligns with what you're wrestling with or struggling with or feeling, and it feels good to see it. It's validating. And it was such a perfect connection that I just kind of, it's not that I'm always going to sell my work. There's always going to be people who like my work, and yeah, there's an audience out there. There's a certain audience. There's a niche that likes my work, but I want to give as much as I can through this organization to these places. And I realize, oh, these are my people. This is like where my art belongs. It almost functioned like the way art used to work in churches, where you'd be sitting there and you'd look up at some stained glass or some painting in the Renaissance or something and be like, yeah, that's what I'm wrestling with right now. So that's kind of a major new development for me, where I want a lot of my art to go into those environments. And to your point, that was just a function of putting myself out there, making organic connections, came up with this idea, and I could have never planned this outcome for my art or where it would land. So I kind of trust that approach more and more. I think the older I get, that there's something larger than me that I'm collaborating with, that I can't know the full picture of. If I can be open to it and not locked down too tightly on my plan and my scheme, and God knows I've done plenty of that in my life with so many projects where it was like, oh, driven, just this is the goal line. I've got to, you know, like 3-year projects, and then you get to the end, and it's like, this is not at all what I planned. It humbles you after a while to stop trying to shape it so much. At least it did for me. And that's a perfect example of like, could have never planned that, but that seems to be where things are going. That was a very long-winded answer to your question.
Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, it sounds like even in seeking opportunities, pardon for me saying this, you're
Hmm.
improvisational in that too.
That's right.
And
That's
there's
right.
nothing wrong with that, because I like too that the way you're approaching them, instead of approaching it like, say, a salesperson, right?
Yeah.
Here's my CRM, here are my
Yep.
leads, here are the people I'm gonna go
Yes.
after and the
And I've done
follow-ups and
all that.
everything
I've
else,
done all that. Yeah.
which there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that, by the way, because especially those that wanna seek, like, big commercial projects, you have to do that, or
Yeah.
people won't, like, I mean, you need to follow the money essentially in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
But by you putting, like, giving back to the community first, some of those opportunities are naturally gonna fall in your lap, because people are gonna be like, "Look at this guy, look what he's doing, look at his art. I love the concept. Actually, I know someone that knows someone that actually would love to have a piece, or you should go
Yeah.
check it out. He's at Art Space, which is open to the public." And then it just, like,
Right.
opens up other
Yeah.
avenues that, like you said, you couldn't have predicted, because it's like word of mouth in a way. You can't control where it goes, right? So,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know, I
Right.
absolutely love that, and I think it's, like, for people that are, like, tired of the hustle culture, I think that's a
Right.
much better approach of, like, what feels good to you, and then what opportunities can come out of that, but you've already narrowed down, "No, I don't wanna go down that way, because I don't that feels, I don't know, that doesn't feel like it resonates." So, that makes a lot of sense. But, with that, and of course, again, like, you've done a lot of different things in your career, something that I'm curious with, and I know this is gonna change over time. I mean, I believe it changes over time, but as it stands right now, how would you define success as an artist, as, where you're standing on this day and
Hmm.
age, so to speak?
I think kind of to echo what we've been saying, for me to be as authentic as possible, to make the art that really wants to come out of me, that and then for it to find its most natural audience, however that whatever that takes to happen. That's when I feel like this machine is working the way it was designed to work. Um, I uh, on the most basic level, that's what success is to me. I think I also have a larger goal I'm finding of just connecting more people to art. I'm a kind of a latecomer to the art world and the gallery world, and I'm a little put off by the walls that have been built between the art world and everyone else, and just how many people feel excluded from the art world, and how elitist it feels and inaccessible to so many people. And it's just a lot of people just think of it as, oh, that's for rich people or whatever. That's not for me. It's like polo or something. Um, but we don't have that approach with music or film or all these other art forms. But in visual art, gallery art, the stuff we do, it's become this cordoned off thing. And I find myself in a subversive way wanting to kind of undermine that and tear down those walls. And that's part of what that nonprofit is about, is to kind of get more art into more people's lives, because there's a whole lot of artists that have more art right now than there are places for it to go, and there's a whole lot of places that need art. Or as I used to say, there's a lot of art with no homes, and there's a lot of homes with no art. And if we all try to play in this one little area of these certain galleries and this certain platforms, a lot of artists sitting here gathering dust, and a lot of walls are sitting here empty, or they just have cheesy posters on them or something. Let's get some original art into more people's lives, and it's an important part of life. So if I can push that ball down the field a little bit, that would be success as well.
Yeah, and in
Uh,
doing so, you're actually educating the public as well that there isn't just one art world. Like the
Yeah,
whole auction stuff or fancy schmancy galleries, that's a tiny little sliver of what the art
yeah,
world is. So you're
mhm.
helping to educate the public, like, no, you can have a $10, you can have a $4 sticker with art on it. You know what I
and
mean? Like,
educate other artists too. Let's
yeah,
all think outside this box. We're all
yeah,
trapped in it. I mean, it
yeah.
sucks you in. As soon as you start looking around the art world, before you know it, everyone's chasing after that same hot person at the bar, fill in the blank. Well, there's other people in this bar that we could date. We all don't have to chase that same hot person at the bar.
It's so very true. Very true.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
what obviously you've had an extensive creative career thus far, but I'm curious, what is one piece of advice you wish you had heard before you got started on your creative journey?
Um, Honestly, I probably heard all the advice. Like, you hear all this advice, you take some of it, you try to take some and fail, you ignore some of it, and then you live life, and life teaches you those lessons anyway. And so I know I had to learn most of these things the hard way, and I keep using the word organic, but just through experience. Um, I'm not sure that any additional advice would have changed my course that much. Um,
Well, if we flip the table for just a second, what would you say
yeah.
to someone that is starting out? Whether they're, I mean, it doesn't matter what age they are, but they're in that cusp of like, should I, could I, like, do I have what it takes? Like they're just at that tender
Hmm.
beginning age. There's a
Hmm.
piece of advice that was meaningful to you that actually
Hmm.
applies. You learn the lesson and you want to
Hmm.
share it forward.
It would mostly be to learn by doing, just to do. You can't think your way there. You have to act your way there. I spent a ton of time journaling and thinking and planning and scheming. I worked a lot too. I've always had a strong work ethic, but none of the planning and scheming, and writing is always good. I mean, there's nothing wrong with journal writing, but none of it got me there except the work, because I find I can plan and scheme as all as one. Then as soon as I sit down to draw or to get in front of a canvas to paint, it's off and it's this direction that I could have never anticipated. I was like, why did I just spend 4 hours planning this? And the muse just went somewhere else immediately. So to learn by doing, to act your way there, and like there's some people say, fail faster, you know, just rapid fire work through this stuff. You get there by working through it, trial and error. And the faster and more efficiently you do that, without that involves not beating yourself up too much if you hit a dead end or it doesn't work out the way you thought. Don't waste time beating yourself up, and just get on to the next thing, because you're going to find through a process of elimination, you're going to assemble that voice that we were talking about, you know?
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
perfect.
Yeah, and I love that idea of just you can't outthink the creative process, because
Hmm.
especially for the type A creatives, we often try to do that, myself
Hmm.
included, where you
Hmm.
can't
Hmm.
outplan it all of the time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But if you were to plan, let's say if you had $100, what would you
A
splurge it
hundred whole
on?
dollars?
$100, which we purposely pick $100 because we
Benjamin.
feel as though for many people it can be
That is a
a
lot of money.
huge changer,
No,
but
it
for
is. It
others
is.
it may not move the needle too much. So being very intentional with as much as $100 or only $100, what would
Right.
you invest it in? And it has to be something related to your art or your business or just something that brings you joy.
Yeah. I feel bad for making fun of the $100. $100. I would love to have $100 right now.
How many
Um,
tubes of golden paint can you buy with $100?
yeah, not
Depends what
enough.
series.
If I had $100, I would probably get a really. I'm a coffee table book addict, art book
Ooh,
addict.
yeah.
I would get a really nice one, because usually the ones I get are in the 30 to 40 range if I'm going to get one. But I could get one of those bougier ones. Yeah,
They
one
can
of
get
those
pricey. They get up there. Do you
deluxe.
have one
Yeah,
in mind in particular, or just one of
I'd
those
have to
fancy ones you don't allow yourself to open or else you'll buy it?
one of those Taschen or
Ooh,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I've got an ongoing list, because it's hard to buy me gifts. My family drives them crazy. So the only thing it's like, here's the books, they're like, send us the list. And then I get
Yeah.
this pile of books for whatever birthday or whatever.
Hey,
So
that's a great idea.
yeah,
Alright, don't
that's
go
probably
looking
what it would
for
be,
it.
a book.
Yeah, don't go looking for it, because then you might spend the money, but Taschen, is that how you say it? Taschen?
Yeah, yeah.
They have a
I
really
think.
nice one of the Japanese woodblock prints that Van Gogh used to collect.
Oh wow.
Oh, the
Yeah.
binding's different that's one that I'm
Ooh.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's gonna be like I'm gonna, like, I don't know, sell, like, the biggest painting ever, and then I'm just gonna be like, "I'm gonna take a little percentage of that sale and just buy that book," because, I mean, come
Yeah.
on.
Treat
Speaking of
yourself.
that woodblock, when we were in France, we went to Monet's, we went to Giverny, and went in his house, and they had reproductions of everything that he had hanging in his house, and some of them were like super famous paintings that his friends had swapped with him. But tons of those Japanese woodcuts. Those
Mhm.
guys were so into that.
Oh, yes, they were.
All of them were, yeah. Wow, the
Uh-huh.
composition, it just totally turned the Western art world upside down. Those Japanese prints, yeah.
Whether they admit it or not.
They did, yeah, they did.
I'm like, Monet, Manet, Whistler, Degas, Klimt, Van Gogh. Oh, yeah, all these guys were collecting
They
the
all
same
did.
stuff too. Oh, yeah. But that's a
Modigliani,
podcast episode
yeah,
for
that's another episode.
I could go down that rabbit hole.
Toulouse-Lautrec, he did that, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Okay, but bringing it back real
Yeah,
quick.
sorry.
What upcoming opportunities are you looking forward to besides the
Um,
nonprofit?
the nonprofit for sure. This year is all about that, and if you follow me on social media, you're definitely going to hear about that in the coming months. There's a show in South Carolina in April. Um, I just gave the Pocket Gallery a few drawings, so I'm
Mhm.
excited to be showing in there for the first time in um, Oakwood neighborhood of Raleigh.
Yeah.
Um, those are the big things. That nonprofits at the top of the list. So can't
Yeah.
wait
Very
to
exciting.
get more
And as
details.
always, of course, coming to your studio at Art Space and signing up for your newsletter, I'm sure as well.
Yep, you can sign up for my newsletter on site here or at my website. You can follow me on social media and all that good stuff.
Awesome. So for our listeners, how should they stay in contact with you? Go ahead and shamelessly plug your social media and your website, all of
Yep,
those things. Of course, we'll have it linked in the show notes, but
yep. Instagram is your pal Adam. Um, the website is adamdcohen.com, and a little pop-up window will come up there to sign up for the e-newsletter. And I'm down here at Art Space up on the second floor. You can find me on Facebook, Adam D. Cohen. I don't really mess with Twitter anymore. So that's that's the extent.
Yeah,
I have
Twitter.
some really nice business cards. You should come get one.
Yeah, we're definitely not gonna talk about Twitter. Um, well,
Yeah,
Adam, thank you so much for sharing, all this valuable information with us. You've definitely dropped a lot of wisdom
thank
nuggets.
you.
Oh, yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Would you mind staying a few extra minutes with us so we can continue our conversation talking about income streams for the bonus segment for our podcast supporters?
Sure, absolutely.
Excellent, excellent. Well, for our listeners, if you want to become a supporter of our podcast, head on to levelupartist.com to find out how you too can support the podcast. We really appreciate it.
And as always, links for today's show notes, as well as a link to our blog and all of Adam's contact information will be listed below. And you can also find links to all of our other podcast episodes.
And if you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share what you have learned, you can follow us on social media. I'm at May Art across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. Or if you want to follow the podcast, we are at Level Up Artists on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.